Thanks for your company. The subject of our interest today is child molestation. That's if you're just joining the show, and which has been linked with poverty, ignorance, poor education, unstable homes, unhealthy environment, as well as the eroding of our cultural values and extended family ties.
That's like covering such a broad spectrum. Yeah. It's been linked to so many things. And I'm sure that our guests will be able to unravel some of those issues that you just threw at us.
I believe so.
Well, child molestation is clearly a violation of the rights of the child. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. And it's also a social and public health concern. Seriously.
And that's the aspect that I'm really worried about yes. When you consider, the level of our healthcare service in Nigeria. We're adding one more area of concern to the health sector, then it's something that should worry us. So to help us understand the pattern and the psychology of abuse is our very first guest on the show today. She is Dr. Gbonjubola Abiri, and later on the show, Pharaoh Owotomo, the lifestyle host, will also try to uncover the culture of silence, which is very worrisome, if you agree with me. And Mr. Taiwo Akinlami will be our guest at that point in time.
You're doing quite well with the names.
And he promises
I see how you struggled through Dr. Gbonjubola's name.
And I didn't struggle.
And you murdered it.
But
I'm sure she'll forgive you for that.
No.
She's actually Dr. Gbonjubola Abiri.
Gbonjubola Abiri.
So, joining us now is the Dr. Gbonjubola Abiri, a consultant psychiatrist and psychologist. She's also a medical director, or the medical director, Tranquil and Quest Behavioral Health in Lagos. She's a fellow of the Nigerian Medical Association.
Dr. Abiri is a lovely, beautiful lady who is passionate about research in child and adolescent forensic. She's also a women's mental health. She's also a sexual and gender-based voice advocate. I don't understand what that means, but she will talk to us more about that. You're welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
PlusTvAfrica.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
So,
Okay.
Dr. Gbonjubola.
She's here. Why are you looking at me? She is here. She's a guest.
No, could you set that straight? Gbonjubola Abiri, straight.
So that's what it is, Gbonjubola. And so I like to put the Yoruba,
yes,
and teach you and say it is me, re, me, Gbonjubola Abiri.
Okay.
So me, re, me.
Great.
Simple.
Great. And like Helen said earlier today, we'll be taking a look at the trending issue of child molestation. We seek better understanding of what it is first, and that's for obvious reasons, and why it has become even more prevalent these days, and what are the psychological and other consequences of this ugly, very ugly act. As a professional who's most definitely familiar with the several angles to child molestation, could you first tell us why is it trending so much these days?
Well, thank you very much for asking me to speak about this topical yet sensitive issue that, like you've said, appears to be trending these days. Again, well, it's getting the attention that it deserves. That's why it appears to be trending. And of course, it doesn't mean that it hasn't always been there. It's always been there, but there's a lot more knowledge, there's a lot more awareness, there's a lot more education and advocacy. And of course, where there's knowledge, the people don't perish. It means that the people are, aware of what's going on. They know what name to call it. They know how to call it out. They know where to get help. And so that's why it looks like all of a sudden, the attention or the spotlight is, focused on child abuse. It's been around for a very long time. The cases, of course, had gone unreported over the years, largely because, people, again, like you had said when you were speaking, were often, like to act like, ostrich with head in sand, the culture of silence. And so poverty, like you had mentioned, ignorance, the socioeconomic environment, financial difficulties, adversities in the environment, of course, did not make people bring attention to such a topical issue. But things are changing. Trends are changing, especially with the advent of the social media as well. There's a lot of, I mean, something happens in Puerto Rico somewhere. I don't know what Puerto Rico is. And
the next minute,
it's there the next minute. So it's always been, sadly so, the culture has appeared to continue. And I think it's largely because the environment also appears to have enabled it, largely by silence, largely by not talking about it or dealing with it when the issues arise, or, you know, putting down the people who actually voice out their experiences, that, oh, this is what I went through. And unfortunately, the people who had gone through these issues don't come for help. They don't get any sort of healing or recovery. And unfortunately, the cycle continues because, you know, like it's rightly said, a hurt person will hurt a person. And so, you know, to pretty much then talk about what the environment does is captured very nicely in what Nelson Mandela said, that you can tell, you know, explicitly how the soul of a society in how it treats its children. And so if we're seeing, you know, a lot more cases of how children are neglected, how they're abused physically, sexually, emotionally, psychologically, it of course goes to show us that it's a matter of growing concern. And the more we give, you know, the attention it deserves to it, the better for all of us.
Yeah, but I think, yes, I agree with you. But I think we need to put all the we've heard a lot of terminologies, you know, some of them to us, you know, novices.
Yeah. Molestation.
You've heard child molestation, you've heard child abuse, you've heard child sexual abuse, and all of that.
Put them in context.
All right, so let's put it all together.
Yes.
And I think it's safe to say that if we put everything under the umbrella of abuse, we would have been seen to have done, you know, a fantastic job. That's largely because if you look at the definition, the dictionary definition of molestation, and you put child in front of it, it looks largely at just sexual assault or abuse. Yeah. If you also look at abuse, abuse is that bigger, you know, umbrella that connotes or refers to any act that may be physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, or neglect towards a child. Yeah. A child, of course, as defined by the UNICEF, is anyone who is less than 18, or at least what the law stipulates. But over and about everywhere, it's pretty much the age of 18. So any act in any of those areas that, you know, affects the child in any of these areas is seen as abuse, and of course should be given, again, the attention that it deserves.
Okay, thank you so much.
Well, no doubt families have been scared and relegated to lives of endless psychological trauma, like you have mentioned. Now, how severe can this be for the victim, for the family, and to the society at large?
All right, so, you know, when trauma happens, trauma, again, can be what we call a form of process trauma or an event trauma. And so an event trauma happens once, a fire, a hurricane. Most times when abuse happens for children, it's usually in areas where they're supposed to feel safe, with people who they're supposed to feel safe with. So their homes, schools, sadly, religious organizations. Some of the stories that I have heard about what happened to children in religious organizations are, you know, quite saddening. And so if a child goes to any of these places, does not feel safe, or it's pretty much like I have my innocence forcefully taken away from me. Again, you know, I've sat with people in sessions who I say to them, were you ever sexually assaulted as a child? And they say, oh, nobody touched me. And I'm like, it's beyond being touched. Did anybody ask you to watch an inappropriate act or show you something that was inappropriate for you at that age? And they would say to me that, well, you know, doctor, at a point, I also started enjoying it. It doesn't define the fact, or does not remove the fact that it is still not abuse. You were a child, a minor, you could not take a decision for yourself, and that individual, of course, pretty much just, you know, decided to take over your innocence. So the truth is, when it does happen, there are direct impacts on the victim, and indirect, of course, it affects the environment, it affects the society first of all, the family, which is the microcosm of that individual. And then, of course, it starts growing wider into a bigger society. You know, a few weeks ago, I had heard about the story of a little child who went to a toilet with another child and told the other child to perform, you know, certain acts on him. Chances are that child has most likely been exposed to abuse.
To that. Yeah.
Physical or sexual abuse. Again, abuse does not occur in isolation. It's seen to occur. So if you see physical abuse, you're likely to see emotional abuse. You're likely to see sexual abuse. Or the child has had access to pornographic materials at that age. So the impact is not just on the one who suffers that initial act. Again, initial act meaning it may happen once, but it may also happen over years. I've heard stories of, you know, people who live with their parents. The abuser lives in their home, and for so many years, parents are unaware of what has been going on in their homes. Eventually, when they do find out, of course, there's a lack of trust, they're heartbroken, there's the blame game, there's shame, which, again, will, of course, allow this vicious cycle to continue.
Now, are you suggesting that that influence, there has to have been some kind of influence for the child? Can't some of it come from our animalistic, that yes, as animals, in quotes, instincts, that you maybe grow into some of these, your body's desires, just naturally?
Well, so yes, as social beings, quote unquote.
Okay.
The truth is, we all go through different phases of development. And so children go through phases of development that encourages them to be curious, to explore.
Yeah.
In this age and time, children they have devices. Yeah. The average child has a phone. In fact, 7, 8, 9, sometimes as little as 5. The average child has a laptop. And so if they see anything that looks, well, kind of weird, they'll click on it. Unfortunately, quite a number of, things are not censored these days. Yeah. And so once children get in, it's a gateway to so much. So yes, curiosity, of course, will let them go in. Curiosity will let them keep going back. Again, sometimes we think that the information that we give children, oh, don't do this, don't do this, it can go either ways. It can allow the child not to explore, or you can even, pitch the curiosity of the child and say, I want to, this same thing. I must know exactly. This thing that he said, don't go. So, again, there has to be an influence. And so that influence can be internal from the child, or it can be external from the environment as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, abusers, like you have said, are usually quite known. Yeah. Very well known by victims and maybe members of their families. Now, certainly there will be telltale signs, by potential abusers. How observant can parents and wards be, so that we can look out to prevent falling victims to predators?
Well, so I think that one of the first things that parents should do is you should know your children. You may not 100% know them, but be able to effectively say that my child will do this, my child may do this, this is how my child will react under certain circumstances. So know your own self and then know your children. Secondly, have a high index of suspicion. Again, the truth is it can be anybody. No matter how nice looking, kind-hearted, or whatever it is. The third thing I would say is educate your children. From the age of, in fact, once they start to talk and they can identify body parts, no one should touch you here, you can increase the knowledge as they grow older. Educate them. Tell them, child sexual education, tell them what it is they need to know, arm them with the information, buy them books, and encourage them to ask you whatever questions it is that they have. There's something that we don't do a lot in the African environment, and I think it's something that we should start doing. If you're going to get a visitor in your home, tell your children. Seek their opinion. Seek their consent. This person is coming to stay with us. What are your thoughts? I mean, I've had situations like that when I mentioned to my children, oh, guys, I have to travel. Somebody's coming to stay with you. And both of them at the same time said, ah! And I'm like, what? They're like, she's always shouting at us. Okay. Again, shouting may not look like anything, but it starts to impact negatively on the self-esteem of a child. So let's carry our children along. Let them be aware of what is going on. I mean, these things are all around. So even if we don't tell them, they'll find out somewhere else. The other thing is believe your children. When children tell you something, believe it. When children start to say that, oh, I don't want to go to this place, and there's no why just yet, be patient with them. Listen to them. Listen in a kind, compassionate, and non-judgmental way. Listen. Ask them why. Tell them to teach you why. Sometimes you may need to even take a child to a therapist to find out what it is that has been going on with that child, because therapists have a way of bringing things out, either through play, through art, anything. They'll be able to bring it out. So I think that the more we're aware, if the environment is more aware, if children are more aware, if adults are more aware, we're likely to be able to, nip this in the bud.
And last week we were talking about celebrating Children's Day. And what she just talked about was one of the things that we brushed through, the right for the children to be part of the decision making in the family.
Yes.
And for us to be able to believe them, not relegate them to the background because probably they're not contributing to, we think, anything positive in the family. And we don't believe them. We just think that they're childish a lot of the times. And I'm guilty of that.
Yeah. And you see your opening remarks, the opening part of your answer to the last question, suggests that there's hardly anyone left in the world to trust.
Yeah.
And that worries me a lot. So even your father, I'm sorry, or your mother, to balance it out, who can we trust? It's really difficult, and we'll talk about the solutions later. But I see education and a lot of it, playing a major role in this. For now, let's. You see, so many times the incidence of abuse, occurs even outside the home.
Yes.
Of the victims. And what do you think would be the common signs to look at? Because your child leaves your safe haven.
Goes to school.
Goes to school.
Goes to church.
Goes to your religious whatever, and is abused there. There will be some signs. What do we look out for?
All right. So I like to say that let's look for a deviation from the norm, which is why I said earlier, know your child. Okay. If you know your child, you would know when your child starts to get unusually cranky, irritable, sad, wanting to keep to self. And so those are some of the signs. But the signs that you also may see can be on two extremes. Two things can always happen. The child may become overly outgoing, overly excited, or the child can become a recluse and want to keep to self. So start noticing things that your children are doing rather differently. A rather, outgoing, playful child, as she become withdrawn, preferring to stay in her room, not wanting to talk to you, not wanting to talk to her siblings, not wanting to talk to friends, shouting at the slightest opportunity, refusing to eat, refusing to go out, refusing to go to a certain place. Then you go to the children's academics. Sometimes you find that children's academics start to suffer. And so usually, bright child who probably used to top the class or used to, give a lot of good feedback in class, the teacher may even start complaining. The friends may start complaining. Or you could also, of course, look at the child's report sheet and see that this child has started, failing, not paying attention in class.
Dwindling.
Yes, and then another thing is that the children can also, again, the flip side. They start to do things that warrant attention. So negative things in school, just about anything to get attention. They'll tell you, this child fought in school. This child took another person's snack in school. This child shouted at the teacher. This child, I saw a child a few weeks ago, she actually slapped the teacher. And by the time she got home and they were trying to correct her, she slapped the father. Wow. And of course, it was difficult for me because they didn't understand that, there had been a deviation from the norm for a long time. So these are some of the things that we see. And then physical and psychological development is that a child that had previously attained a developmental stage in their life suddenly just drops. And so you have a 10-year-old who had attained, daytime and nighttime, bed habits, not bedwetting, and the child starts to bedwet. The child, does not take care of their physical self, or the child can lock themselves up in the bathroom for a long time. The one that we're beginning to see quite a lot lately, and I must say this, is that we start to find that the children are emotionally unstable. And so you find teenagers or young adults these days who have what we call an emotionally unstable personality disorder, previously known as borderline personality disorder. And what happens is that these children are self-harming. And so they take their nails, knives, or blades and start to cut areas of their bodies that ordinarily would be covered and you would not see. So upper arms, thighs, or the children may even start to turn to substances of abuse. So they would look for alcohol, they would look for, marijuana, all other illicit substances just to cope with their stress. The children may also turn to pornography as a safe haven.
And these are all spin-offs from...
Definitely. I mean, so...
some form of molestation.
Yes, it's important to say that all of this, seemingly negative things are actually coping strategies, but they are unhealthy, maladaptive coping strategies. And because the children don't know any better, they can't do any better.
But maybe I should dive in.
They're not talking to
maybe I should
their
dive
family
in
members.
I should dive in here because I'm finding a conflict, sort of, in my mind. Because a child gets to like age 11, 12 and suffers teenage blues. Teenage blues may not necessarily be as a result of abuse.
Definitely.
How does one separate the effect of teenage blues from the effect of molestation and other
so
things?
Again,
yes.
If you don't find the cause, you won't know. So asking that simple question from your child, trying to find out if they've been abused is important, or looking out for the signs of abuse is important. Almost every teenager will go through the rigors of adolescence. And I think it's important that, adults these days start to understand that the period of adolescence is fraught with its own challenges.
Yes.
These children are going through a lot of physical changes, which they don't understand. I know that a few weeks ago, my daughter was still telling me, Mommy, when are my breasts going to come out? And I'm like, calm down. They will come out. In fact, by the time they come out, I'm like, when am I going to have my first pimple? You will soon be the one telling me, oh God, Mommy, when will these pimples go away? So we need to prepare them and get them ready. That it is a life-defining moment. It's like, we in our 40s and our 50s, we have never been there before, and so we need to get ready for that stage of our lives. If you arrive there and you don't know what's going to happen, you're likely to be in shock. So let these children know your bodies will change physically, your mind will change, I think it's important to add that the psychologist Erik Erikson, who looked at the psychosocial development, describes the period of adolescence as that period that is identity versus role confusion. So many of the struggles that we see in adolescence are because they're either trying to find their identity. Who am I? Who are my friends? What am I? What are my values? Do I look cool? Should I join the cool gang or should I join the nerd gang? If a child is successfully able to, negotiate finding their own identity, which doesn't just happen at that stage. Again, remember that every phase of a child's development would have achieved something. So between the ages of like 6 and 9, you expect that the child would have gotten their self-esteem. Within the ages of 0 to 18, you know that this child would have gotten trust. Within the ages of 3 to 6, you know that this child would have gotten autonomy. I can do things by myself. And so all of those areas prepare the child for that major phase. So trying to find out if it's teenage blues or whether it is abuse is going back to what is the cause? The behavior that we're seeing now, is there an underlying cause? Or did we just arrive at it because, well, this child is going through this physical, emotional, psychological changes? Interestingly, the age of getting crushes now has reduced. It used to be in the teenage years, but now you're hearing that 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds have crushes as well.
Okay, this is a very serious subject, and I'm happy that we're dealing with it like this, laughing about it, but it's serious matter. Child abuse goes beyond child sexual exploitation.
Definitely.
And even some of our cultural practices quite easily present as molestation and abuse, sometimes with very thin line differentiating them. Just in a minute or two, talk to us about the cultural influence in this subject?
Well, so because we are Africans and more specifically Nigerians, it's difficult to have conversations without, looking at the influences of culture and religion, which are two, factors, if you may, that have, I like to say, sometimes held us back for too long and not let us, develop as much as we should. Of course, culture is beautiful when it is used, in the right way. And so some of the, cultural practices that we have seen around are, practices like circumcision, female genital mutilation. I mean, circumcision is to put it mildly. So female genital mutilation, child marriage, child trafficking, even practices that allow children to sell things in the street. Those are, in those days, they used to say that you would know how rich a man was with the amount of children that he could take to the farm. And so child labor as well. And so all of these things have been, over time, pretty much allowed to thrive, again, because of that culture of poverty and ignorance. So as long as we continue to have all of those things in the mix, where people are not, educated about what else could be, how this is the norm, how that a child is selling. Some of these children don't even go to school. So we should also talk about the fact that children are being deprived from going to school to learn. I mean, childhood should be a time when a child is happy, is a child, is happy, has a right to life, has a right to live, has a right to play. Some people complain, they say some children play too much. I'm like, that's the only job that a child has. Let the child play for God's sake. And so a lot of our cultural practices have continued to enable the culture of abuse. And until we, start to talk about them, start to question them, start to educate people, it may be difficult to get past them. Of course, the economic difficulties also, we shouldn't, neglect that and continue to allow some of these cultural habits to thrive.
Which leads us to the next question.
After the break?
After the break?
After the break?
After the break.
You can take a drink of water,
if you say so, Helen.
I think the director is asking for a break. Director,
why
am
not?
I right?
So we'll take a break now.
Okay.
And we'll be right
It's
back.
Today with John and Helen. Please stay with us.
So you're welcome back, and we're still on the program today with John and Helen. And of course, we've had the privilege and honor, singular honor, of our dear consultant psychiatrist and psychologist and all of that, Dr. Gbonjubola Abiri. And she's been with us dissecting all the different faces and the angles to child molestation. And I must say that we've learned quite a lot within the very short time that you've been with us. But we're still going to keep you a little longer so we can thrash a few.
Okay. And I know you have loads of questions within the next 10, 12 minutes that we have with her.
Yes.
But some time ago I asked you a question and you couldn't give me the answer.
Remind me.
I think she's the proper person to answer that.
Remind me.
And please, doctor, the question is, I've always wondered, and I'm curious, how come a full-grown man or woman gets interested to the extent of finding an underage attractive, I wouldn't go further. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. What happens? What is it in that man or that woman when they can find grown men and grown women around? What is it in that child or in that person that probably connects?
Well, so the topic that you've delved into is a huge one, and it's the topic of sexual disorders. Okay. And so people do have sexual disorders. Sometimes the sexual disorders are disorders depending on, the phase of the sexual sexual stages. There's different sexual stages of desire, arousal, or even resolution. But you also have people who have, sexual problems. And in these sexual problems, quite a number of factors arise. I'll give you one example. There was a day I was in the University of Ilorin, and I was moving from one part of my campus to another. And so I sat in this cab, and I just kept feeling pressure on my leg. And every time I felt the pressure, I would move. And I would feel the pressure again, and I would move. And I looked to my side, and I saw that it was a young man that was seated there. But by the time I looked down, his spinal organ was out, and he was rubbing it against me. So that's a sexual disorder.
In a cab?
In a cab, yes. That's a sexual disorder. So what you've highlighted is, of course, pedophilia.
That is
Yes.
disorder.
Yes. So some people, their sexual disorder is that they like to watch other people in the act. Some people like to be beaten, physically assaulted while that is going on. So pedophilia as a sexual disorder is quite rampant, quite underreported. And of course, like you have said, it's that a full-grown adult has sexual desires towards a little child. That's where their own, sexual satisfaction comes from. If you want to look at it quite critically, you'd find that chances are that abuser was also abused as a child.
As a child, yes.
And so, again, not given the attention that he deserved, not taken to therapy, not allowed to heal or recover from that episode or experience. And so you have that individual.
So the vicious circle.
Yes, again.
But don't you think that, I agree with you, okay, but don't you think that would be giving them excuses? Because, it's not all cases that would have evolved from, sexual abuse. Some people are just plain
perverts
and need to be punished.
Yes.
Now, are we making enough progress, with the advocacy for stiffer penalties, or punitive measures by the law? And what do you think about how we can attain it? So that some people, those people who are not, who we cannot make excuses for, will get punished.
Even the ones that we can make excuses for, will get punished.
So here's the thing, because I'm a professional, I have to be seen to give a balanced viewpoint.
Yes.
So it's not like I'm making a case for the people who do these things, but for us, it's a disorder. That's what it is, more often than not. However, like you said, you can't excuse everything under the umbrella of this person is mentally ill. And so, of course, even if the person is mentally ill or the person did it with, an intent, knowing what it was, individuals should be punished for taking advantage of a child, of an underage, especially because the one who has been taken advantage of has to live with that, the implications or the consequences of that trauma for the rest of their lives. So it's not about making a case for them. It's just about, stating it as it is. This is what it is. However, everything cannot be excused under the umbrella of a mental illness. And so when we find these people, they should be, adequately catered to. So managed, and if punishment also comes, underneath it, well, why not? If the law, of course, finds them guilty. But of course, our own, type of management is what we call holistic and multidisciplinary. And so you have to look at the individual as a person, not just generalize that, because this person did it because he was molested as a child means that this other person would do it because they were molested as a child. You need to make a case for that individual, give attention to that individual, tend to them, treat them, manage them, and then again, like I said, if punishment is part of the mix.
It's a criminal case.
Yes, it is. So definitely.
That's the reason why you're not a judge.
Not just yet.
Because the response you just gave me now still tends towards management and getting those people treated.
Yep.
Okay, so we're not leaving it entirely to government. From all that we have said, to provide support and succor, to victims. What are the other areas that we should expect support from? What other areas are available for people probably who have issues they do not understand? Parents, children, what have you. They don't understand. What are the venues or facilities that are available for them, that they can easily reach out to?
The one that I usually preach the most is the home. Let charity start at home. Let parents be more involved, more aware. Let parents be their children's best friends. Let parents understand their children. And if there's anything going on that parents do not understand, of course, reach out to people who understand. There's the place for professional support. And that professional support can be, with a counselor or with a professional therapist. there's nobody too young to see a therapist. And so if you had a 5-year-old who was having, difficulty coping with classmates, beating everybody up or keeping to self, let them talk to someone. There are child psychologists, child psychiatrists who can tend to these children. A lot of course, non-governmental organizations and not-for-profit organizations are also doing quite a lot to, bring awareness to, increase education, and advocate for the rights of the child. All of these people, must be encouraged to continue the hard work that they're doing. And then I think the biggest question, of course, at the end of the day is to ask, what are you doing? I mean, so this morning, we're talking about it. In my individual space, what am I doing? A few times, I've come into contact with children who, were either victims of abuse, and apart from, providing support, which is what you had seen, the sexual and gender violence advocate, is that I also get them materials. So books, get them books, give them information, point people in the right direction, link people to places where they can get support. Otherwise, we just always hear that, oh, it's a family matter. Let's just, cover it up. We should let, cases like that get, the attention that they deserve. And of course, if someone has done something wrong, they should be punished for the act or the action that they've...
This is incredible stuff you just gave to us, Dr. Abiri. And we're getting to the end of the program now, and I must slip this in, that you really don't look like a shrink.
She's not a shrink. She's a psychologist, not only a
What's the difference?
I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abiri. It's always a
welcome.
pleasure, talking to you.
Welcome.
And because of the passion with which you do this, we thank you for the work that you do. And we hope that with more people doing what you do, our children will find their voices and save heaven, like you said, not only in their homes, but in the environment.
Amen.
Thank you so much. Okay. The culture of silence.
Yes, that's coming next.
Is it African? Is it not African? And all of it. Should we be quiet? Should we not be quiet? If we're shouting about it, where do we go? And all so much to talk about. Pharaoh will be back after some time on this sit with her guests, and they'll be looking at the culture of silence. But before that, we have our Keep Fit segment.
Oh, yes.
So if you haven't done some exercises this morning, this is the time for you to
And
get
I'm
up
not going to point.
as if you did anything. Go, Joe. Please let's go and do some shaking up and keep fit.